Hey everybody, what's up? It is Follow Up Friday. That's right, Follow Up Friday. And so we are continuing our series where we are talking about drawing close to God. Because again, as Christ followers, we should be desiring to draw closer to God each and every day. And so, especially as leaders, it's super imperative for us to draw close to God, because as we draw closer to Him, the overflow that happens within our lives helps us do the ministry that He's called us to do. And so we're going to continue in that vein this week with talking about the last key, because we've been talking about 3 keys on drawing close to God, and we're going to talk about the last key today. And so as we have been progressing in this series, we have seen that we need to humble ourselves, because God opposes the proud, but He gives grace to the humble. So humbling ourselves before God is a key as we're drawing closer to God. And then we see that resisting Satan, to resist Satan, is another one of those keys, because when temptation comes, and it will, we need to combat that with our knowledge of His word and His truth, but also with the weapons that He has given us. Because again, we know that our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, and darkness. And so God has given us spiritual weapons such as the armor of God to combat the enemy's temptations. But if we never resist the enemy's temptations, then we fall prey to his devices, therefore hindering us from drawing close to God. And so now we find ourselves in the last key, which is purify your hearts. Again, purify your hearts. So let's go to James chapter 4. We'll start with verse 8, and we're going to read. I'm actually going to read all the way to verse 10 and finish out this little section. So let's start with 8. It says, "Come close to God," or draw close to God, "and He will come close to you. Wash your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, for your loyalty is divided between God and the world. Let there be tears for what you have done. Let there be sorrow and deep grief. Let there be sadness instead of laughter, and gloom instead of joy. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will lift you up in honor." So that's like, wow, what a freaking bummer, right? Wash your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts. Be sad for all the crappy things that you've done in your life. Remember, let's go back to the context of this passage. James is writing to the first century Jews who have been in Gentile communities in Palestine. And it's one of those things of like, their culture has been around this counterculture to what the Jews believed at this time had been around them, forcing its way upon them. And I think we can all identify with that in our lives today, in the world that we live in. And so what he's saying is wash your hands of that junk and purify your hearts, because your loyalty has been divided between God and the world. What do you truly want? Do you seek to draw closer to God, or do you want to be closer to the world? Because that's really going to determine your path and what you want to do. So let's focus on this for a second. How do we purify our hearts is what I want to talk about. And if we look at it, I've got here, it says purify. And I went and I looked at the Greek, and it says ceremonially. So it's talking about ceremonially purify yourself. Cleanse is another word that they use. Or you could also use the word refine. And so what we're talking about here, ceremonially, they need to cleanse themselves or purify their hearts and turn back to God's ways of life rather than the world. And so if we want to draw close to God, then we have to purify or be purified, or allow the impurities in our lives to come to the surface so that they can be scraped off and purified. So the refining process is pretty cool, and there's several different ways that metals can be refined. One of the ways that I enjoy listening to is the by fire. So when they refine by fire, and God talks about that in His Word, and I've been kind of studying up on that. But it's a slow process, but it's a necessary process. but it's also a process that isn't pleasant. Why? Because there's fire applied to it. And so when we are purifying our hearts, there are going to be things in our lives as we're drawing close to God that He is going to bring to the surface. And we're going to realize how gross we are and how our attitudes stink or how our thinking stinks. Whatever it is, they're going to come to the surface and you're going to think, man, I'm dirty. Or maybe you think I'm good, but you see these patterns in your life that's not good. There's a refining process that is happening. And as we're drawing close to God, it is important for us to identify those impurities and not see them as the end game, like, oh my gosh, my life is over, I'm such a bad person. No, it's allowing those impurities to come to the surface so that we can be sad for the way that we've acted, and we can be repentant in the way that we've acted, so that those impurities can be scraped off the surface, and the metal that is within us, the precious metal, is begin to be purified. And that's how God purifies our hearts. So that whole process of being convicted and that whole process of impurities in our lives coming to the surface is necessary for us to draw close to God, because we don't need to be shocked when we're drawing close to God that these ugly impurities in our lives are brought to the surface, because it's only when those impurities are revealed and scraped off that we can become pure. And so I pray that this encourages you, and I pray that it also challenges you to identify those areas in your life. Because as we are drawing close to God, this is going to happen. But it's so necessary for us that as we are drawing close to God, that we're allowing this refining and this purifying process to happen in our lives so that we can draw closer to God. And it's going to require sacrifice. It's going to require some discomfort on our parts, but it's necessary. And as leaders, super necessary, so that we can truly answer the call that God has placed on our life and truly be efficient in stewarding the disciples that He's placed in our path. And so I hope that, again, that encourages you, and I hope that it challenges you. If you guys have anything that you need, we would love to pray with you. We would love to talk with you. Just reach out to us. We are for you. We are thankful for you, and we're excited about what God is doing in your life and in the life of Summit Church. And so have a wonderful weekend, a Memorial Day weekend, and we will see you Sunday at service.